Hey, what is going on everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you are doing well today. Now in this video, I wanted to quickly talk about the brand new development tool that was recently released by Google called Flutter. Now, a lot of you guys are probably well aware of exactly what Flutter is, but basically it is a cross-platform development tool that allows you to target both the iOS and Android platforms with one single code base using the programming language called Dart, which is also something else that was released by Google itself. So in the past 2 weeks or so, I've been playing around with Flutter for a little bit, and I find it really easy to develop applications for both iOS and Android using the Dart programming language. So in today's video, I wanted to give you a quick introduction as to how you can build out some simple applications that look like this over here. You can see it's very basic. It has a navigation bar at the top and a piece of text that's centered in the middle. And so once we are able to put this app together, I want to show you how you can transform this simple app into a basic list application inside of Flutter. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because 90% of our applications in iOS and Android are basically list-based, right? So this exercise is going to give you a pretty good idea as to whether or not you like the programming language at all and whether or not you like Flutter, the framework itself. So we're going to be using Microsoft's Visual Studio Code, which is an open source code editor that's really fast and modern, and you're going to be able to see how easy it is to actually build out some of these apps. All right, let's go ahead and get started right now. All right, everyone, hopefully you're excited to join me for today's coding session using Flutter. The way I want to begin is to actually show you what I have on the screen, which is the actual Visual Studio Code editor right over here. And I'm inside of this file called main.dart. And if you're not familiar with this editor, it's probably because you don't have it installed yet. So in order to grab the installer, head on over to code.visualstudio.com and obviously download the package for whatever OS you are on. And once you have everything installed correctly in the proper locations of your computer, you have to do one more thing before you can actually build using the Flutter framework. And that is to configure the VS Code editor, Visual Studio Code, so that it can, install this Dart code plugin using these couple of steps over here. So it's actually pretty straightforward and pretty easy. Let me just quickly go over exactly what you need to do with this view command palette extensions install extension thing. So let's head on over back into Visual Studio Code. And you gotta hit this view button at the top, hit on command palette. And once you're inside of here, you want to say install extensions, just click on this thing, which will bring you inside of this fifth tab over here. So previously you're inside of this tab. And once you're inside of extensions, obviously you want to search for Dart and you'll come upon this Dart code extension. Obviously I already have it installed, so that's kind of why it says uninstall over here. So make sure to install this plugin properly, and you might have to restart Visual Studio Code, but once you do all of that, everything should be good to go. The next thing you want to do is to simply go back to the view command palette, and you want to type in Flutter new project, and you'll get this guy over here. So I'm going to call this new project getting started with an underscore in between, hit enter, and then store it somewhere inside of your computer. And once you click that, Visual Studio Code will generate this project for you over here. So let me just drag it up to the top and maybe expand it a little bit down to the bottom, just like that. Okay, so the question now is, what exactly did Visual Studio Code do for us? Well, it generated a bunch of files, and the main thing that you have to be aware of is this main.dart file, which is pretty much the entry point for your application. So it generated this thing called my app, which extends a stateless widget, and you probably don't know what that is yet. And you have this material app thing down below as well as this state object over here somewhere. And basically what I want to do is to run this out of the box application somehow inside of the simulator, which I have loaded up on the right side. So how do you run an application using Flutter? Well, you have a little button on the bottom right that allows you to select a bunch of your simulators. So let me just choose the iPhone X simulator, and you can hit the debug up here or hit this bug button on the left side and try to run your code by just hitting this play button. and you'll kind of be shown this debug console with your application over here. All right, so that's pretty basic, and this default template application allows you to hit this little plus button on the bottom right, and that just increments this little counter UI in the middle, and that's pretty good, right? So now that you have your project created, well, why don't we see exactly how an application works inside of Flutter using the Dart programming language right now. Now, personally for me, whenever I come in contact with a brand new development tool such as Flutter, I like to learn how everything works by removing as much code as I can from the default application. So I'm going to remove everything starting from right here all the way down to the bottom, hit the delete, and now I just have 2 lines of code. My app is trying to run this thing called my app, which is no longer there. So I'm going to create a brand new application myself by first creating a class, and I'm going to call this getting started app like so. And I'm going to extend something called a stateless widget. And a stateless widget is responsible for rendering out something inside of your UI. And the way it renders something is to kind of override this build method, and you have to return some kind of object to render onto the screen. And this object is known as a widget. So one possible widget is to return something called a text widget with some kind of text, and we'll just say hello for now. All right, so with this getting started app, I can replace my app with getting started. And now you can try to hit the hot reload, and upon doing so, you'll get this error right here that says that your my homepage state thing is no longer there. So to fix this, you want to hit the stop button and go to the debug over here, hit the play or hit the start debugging thing. And what's going on is you have to restart your application if you replace the root component inside of this run app call. And that's what we did. So make sure to restart your app. And once you have the application up and running, you should see a different error over here. Now this error complains about some kind of directionality widget, which is introduced using some kind of material app thing. So I'll show you how to fix that problem by modifying this build method one more time. And so each app should really return a material app widget instead. And so this material app has a couple of properties that you want to provide, such as title. And so we'll give it a string of getting started title, and then down below, right after the title, you want to provide something called home. So home is going to be the root widget that you will render whenever your app starts. So this guy, we will say new text, and we'll say home like that, and we will just remove that. And you want to make sure you end all of your lines of code in Dart with a semicolon. And now you get the hot reload. You'll see home all the way up at the top left, and that comes from this piece of text over here. So if you modify this and hit the hot reload, you'll see the changes occur immediately, right? So this is one of the nice aspects of Flutter. This feature called hot reload makes development really, really quick. All right, so the next thing you really want to do is to maybe center this text inside of your view somehow. And so how do we do that? Well, let me provide a center container widget instead of just the text. And center, you can provide one single child, and let's say new text and centered text over there. And I'm just going to hit Command S to save, and that's going to hot reload for me, kind of inside of the simulator over here. All right, so that's pretty good, right? And now the thing that's missing from your application is something called a scaffold that provides you with the application bar and then the white background that a regular app should have, and that's called a scaffold. So I'm going to, instead of providing a center over here, I'm going to use new scaffold. So new scaffold over here, and this guy has something called a body, and so let's say new center, and over here it has one child, new text. So this is pretty easy to type out. So center, hit this save, and you'll see the scaffold give us a white background, and the text is still centered in the middle. Now, in order to get the blue navigation bar, that's also really easy. For the scaffold, you want to provide an app bar, and let's say new app bar. This guy has a title component on it. One thing that's kind of confusing about the Dart programming language is sometimes you just don't know exactly what to provide for these properties, and you have to look at the documentation on the right side over here. So it's a widget, which means that you want to provide some kind of widget like a text component. And so this is going to be the app bar title, and let me just hit save, and you'll see the app bar show up immediately up at the top there. All right, so this is the scaffold for your project, and inside of the body of the scaffold is just the text that you have centered over here. All right, so that's pretty good, and this is how you set up a basic project for your application. And let me show you exactly how to render out a list, kind of like this right now, by transforming this application over here. But before I do that, I want to show you something that has to do with the architecture of your Flutter and Dart applications. So instead of providing a bunch of stuff for the body over here for your scaffold, you can actually provide another widget to be rendered instead of the center widget. So once you see what I do over here, everything's going to become much easier to understand. So this is my home widget over here, and this extends another stateless widget. And again, a widget is responsible for rendering out something onto the screen by using a build method. So this build guy, you can return something like a new text, just like before, 1, 2, 3, and make sure to end this with a semicolon. And what you can do with widget right here, the home widget, is to replace the body with home widget instead. So new home widget, hit the save, and now your application will have 1, 2, 3 over here, because instead of using the center thing, we're now using this home widget over here. So you can provide the new center again if you wanted to do so. So child, new text, ABC, hit the save, make sure to hit a semicolon, hit the save. ABC will appear in the middle over there right now. So ABC, hit the save again, and that change will hot reload immediately. Now, the next thing you're probably interested in doing is to modify the text somehow. So let's say you provide something like a style, and this guy will be new text style. And this guy, you can say font size and provide 18. And because the font size is a double, you have to use a decimal like that. And this is what 18 text looks like. So change that to 24. The text is much, much larger. All right, so one thing about these widgets is that you want to provide the right indentation for each one of these things. So you probably want to say style like this instead of just having it in one line, because it becomes really hard to read, is what I've noticed from my experience so far. Okay, so this is how you provide another widget that sort of encapsulates what you want to render for the body object for your scaffold. And you'll notice that as you develop your Flutter apps, that everything that is a view is going to be constructed as a widget class itself. And this keeps your Flutter apps really clean and not all kind of jumbled up into one place, kind of like what we had before. All right, so hopefully everyone understands how easy it is to create a very basic application using this widget here and this widget above. So now let's move on to the next task at hand, which is to create a list view that kind of looks like this. This list contains a bunch of these rows that have a couple of components inside of it. We have the image view, some text over here, and this little divider in the middle that's really faint, but it is definitely there. Hopefully you can see it. So let me move on to creating a list by modifying this home widget component. And instead of returning this center text thing, let's go ahead and return something else, maybe a new list view. And I'm going to call this method on it called builder. So the builder will help us return a list that contains a certain count of items, and you can just use a random number. Let me just use 20. And before you can render out your list, you have to provide something called an item builder on it. So let's say I remove the last line there and try to hot reload. You'll see an error inside of your simulator. So what you're missing is this item builder thing. And basically, item builder is a function that takes in a context and an integer. This is the row, and it should return a widget itself. So let me show you how to do that by providing a function. This guy, you'll say context. This is the row number. Let's just call it that. And this guy needs to return some kind of widget. Okay. So this function will return a widget for us. So why don't we just say return, new text is a pretty good widget. We'll say a row and return, or make sure to end that with a semicolon. Hit the save or hot reload, and you'll get a row for each one of your 20 item count rows. Inside of here, you can use string interpolation and use a row number. Hit the save again, and you'll see the digit appear right on the right side of the row. All right, so pretty simple and pretty straightforward, right? Now, if you want to return a row that contains multiple items, you can use a different type of widget. So for example, inside of this application, this contains a column of 2 items, or 3 items rather, and I'll show you how to use a column instead of just a raw text widget. So let's return a new column. And a column contains a property called children, which is an array of items. So I'm going to use this over here. So let's just copy this and paste that in there. Hit a comma, comma, and paste in one more time. Remove this last line and end that with a semicolon. Hit the hot reload, and you'll see a bunch of different text elements inside of each one of your rows. So let's say I call this, child 1, and we'll call this child 2, and also this as child 3. Just paste that in there, and you'll see exactly what it's doing. So instead of using text as my third component, why don't I use a divider instead, and hit the save. You'll see that there is now a faint divider line right over there. You can modify the divider by providing a color. Let's say colors.green, and you'll see it show up a little bit darker right there. And so that's how you use a column to provide a vertically stacked UI. And that's kind of how we provide this UI over here. So we have an image and we have some text right below it. So the question now is, how do I provide an image instead of my cells for my rows over there? Well, all you gotta do is to modify the first child inside of your column to be an image instead. So let's say image. And for this guy, you can say .network, and inside of this, you just want to provide the URL for your image. Now, I already have it inside of a different project off the screen right now, which I'll copy and paste it in there. And so once I have this, you can hit the hot reload. You'll see the image appear right at the top. All right, so this is the Instagram Firebase course using Swift that you can check out. And you want to modify the text right below it to be this bold text, right? So I'm going to do that by modifying this second text component. And what do we want to say? Well, Instagram Firebase course, check it out using description link below. Okay, hit the save, and you'll see the text show up right there. If you want to provide some additional styling, you can say style like that. Does that work for me? No, I think I need a column or a comma, and then style, new text style. And this guy will be a new text style, and we'll say font weight. And this guy will be a font weight, and you can use bold like that. Hit the save, and your text will change to be much bigger, and you can say font size 18.0, and it appears like that over there. Okay, so a list of objects is actually really easy to create inside of Flutter. You just want to make sure that for the item builder widget, you return exactly what you want to render out using this return value. Now, the last thing that you want to be able to do is to create some spacing or some padding for your rows inside of your list. And this is actually really easy to do if you kind of return a container component that contains all this stuff. So it's a little bit tricky, but not too difficult. The way we are going to do this is to modify ItemBuilder, and the root component will be a container that I'll return. And inside of here, you can provide something called a padding. You want to say new edge insets all, and I'll use 16.0. And this container will contain one child, and this child will just be this component that we already rendered out over here. So this is probably the trickiest part to get correct inside of the Dart programming language, which is to cut the right components out. So I'm going to paste that in there and remove that line over there. I think I need a semicolon over here. And let's see, this guy, you want to return a new container, and this is something that I always forget to do. So now that you have all that fixed, you can hit the hot reload. You'll see that the padding of 16 appears all edges, so top, left, right, and bottom over here. There is also a bit of spacing over there. Now, the thing about the spacing and the syntax, the way that it's written out right now, is that whenever you have your syntax kind of badly indented like that, you can just highlight everything, and you can right click and say format document, and it'll put everything in the correct location, and now your widget is much cleaner. I don't exactly like the way it does that because it provides this new space for the text over there, which I don't exactly like, but if that's your thing, then feel free to stick with it. And so that's kind of how everything works. There is a slight bug in this horizontal divider where it's kind of being cut off by the padding of 16 over there. So the fix is actually inside of this application, which you can download in the link using the description below. But that's pretty much all I wanted to show you how to do in terms of code. And the last thing I would like to demonstrate is this application that we created using Dart and Flutter. You can actually run this inside of the Android emulator by swapping out the emulator over here. And you can try to run it using this debug thing, but I'm not sure if this is a bug or not, but you have to stop the current application and then run your Android app or run it in a different simulator. So you see it's trying to load and launch into the Android SDK thing. And so I have the Android emulator over here. It's currently not showing anything. The build process does take a while, so it's installing, building, and now it's finally there inside of the emulator. And this code right here that we wrote in just a couple of lines, not even more than 40-ish lines with a lot of spacing in it, is able to render out this list pretty quickly, right? So these are the lists inside of various sizes of the simulator and also the Android emulator, and everything looks pretty darn good. Now, if you wanted to provide some spacing for the text and the image view, you can do that very easily as well. So how do you do that? By going into, let's see, widget build. You can provide something like over here, so image, text, new container. You can say height, you say 8, and comma, make sure to use a decimal for this double, and hit save, and that'll change the text over here to have a little bit of padding on top of it, more specifically a 8 pixel count. So everything looks pretty darn good. All right, everyone, that's going to wrap it up for today's video on how to get started with the Dart programming language to create some very basic applications using the Flutter framework. Now, we've only barely scratched the surface of what Flutter is capable of doing. For example, we haven't talked about how to network using Dart, and we haven't even browsed to a different page inside of our mobile application yet. So there's a lot to explore. If you are interested in a full-blown course using the Flutter framework, make sure to leave a comment down below and also subscribe to the channel. If you want to download the source code for today's video, there is a link in the description below. If you like today's video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the very next video. Bye bye, guys.